Did you see that?
Have you ever held a piece of mail and felt a chill? Not because of what it says, but because of what it represents. A system, a rule, a tiny paper-thin verdict on your life. What if I told you that the most terrifying ghost story doesn't begin in a cemetery but in a mailbox? That the most vengeful spirit isn't a person but a policy? Before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Look around. Where are you watching this? In your living room? Your bedroom? And what time is it? Make a mental note, because the story you are about to hear, it has a way of blurring the lines between then and now, between there and here. If you're ready to understand the true cost of a broken rule, then listen closely. The first chapter begins now. The story of the Walking Dead house did not begin with a corpse. It began with a coupon. A glossy, colorful insert for a pizza delivery service that would never be ordered. Tucked into a stack of mail on a Formica kitchen counter in a 3-bedroom ranch house at 1842 Pelican Lane, Cypress Cove, Florida. The house's sole occupant, Arthur McReady, aged 78, moved the coupon aside. His hands, once steady enough to calibrate gyroscopes for satellites that now silently circled a planet he rarely engaged with, trembled with a faint, persistent tremor. He was looking for a specific envelope. He knew it was due. The quarterly homeowners association fee, $300, a sum that had become, in the foggy geography of his mind, a mountain. Arthur was a man of numbers. In his previous life, as an aerospace engineer for a contractor that worked with NASA during the Apollo program, numbers were his language. They were clean, they were predictable, they obeyed laws. The number 300, however, had transformed. It was no longer just a number. It was a test he was chronically failing. The house around him was a museum to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Photographs of his late wife, Eleanor, smiled from every surface. Her absence was a physical presence, a cold spot in every room. Their 2 children, David and Sarah, beamed from graduation photos. One in Seattle, one in Boston, entire worlds away. The silence in the house was a thick, heavy blanket, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional, distant roar of a lawnmower, a sound that always made Arthur's chest tighten. He'd been a proud man once, a problem solver. Now the problems were different. They were the stove with 2 knobs for the same burner that confused him. They were the days of the week that bled into one another. They were the HOA notices that arrived with the grim regularity of a tide. He finally found the envelope, pristine and white, with the Cypress Cove HOA logo in the corner. He opened it carefully. The amount was $300. He stared at it. He knew he had to pay it. He had a checkbook somewhere. He would find it. He just needed a little more time. On a small notepad he kept by the phone, he wrote in a hand that was still neat but had begun to betray a slight shake. "I will fix it. I promise. I just need a little more time." He placed the notice on a growing stack of identical envelopes. A small paper city of good intentions and forgotten deadlines. Across the street, Carol Gable, a widow of similar age, watched Arthur's house from her kitchen window. She'd noticed the grass was getting a bit long. The newspaper was piling up on the driveway. She'd baked a plate of peanut butter cookies 2 weeks ago, intent on taking them over. She'd even walked to his doorstep. But standing there, plate in hand, she'd hesitated. She didn't want to intrude. He was a private man. Maybe he was visiting his kids. It wasn't her place to pry. The suburban code of minding your own business was a powerful force. She took the cookies back home and ate them herself, one by one with a cup of tea, feeling a vague, unnameable guilt. Meanwhile, in the impeccably clean office of the Cypress Cove HOA, President Richard Hayes was reviewing the delinquency report. His finger stopped on lot 27. Arthur McReady, $300, now $350 with the late fee, then $400. Then $450 with additional administrative costs. Richard Hayes was not a cruel man. He was in his own mind a guardian. He saw Cypress Cove not as a collection of homes, but as an asset, a brand. His life's work was to protect property values, to maintain order, to ensure that the vision of perfect, harmonious suburban living was never compromised. He was a former insurance adjuster, a man who understood risk and liability in cold, hard percentages. Her delinquent account was more than an unpaid bill. It was a crack in the foundation. No single crack, left unattended, could bring down the entire structure. He initiated Phase 1, a reminder letter. Then Phase 2, a final notice. Then Phase 3. The account was handed over to the HOA's legal firm, a group that operated with the dispassionate efficiency of a slaughterhouse. They tacked on legal fees, filing costs, and interest. Arthur's $300 debt began to metastasize, growing into a $200 tumor. Arthur, lost in his own labyrinth, would find these new, more threatening letters. He'd read them, his brow furrowed in concentration. The columns of numbers and legal jargon were like a foreign language. He'd add another line to his notepad. "I will fix it. I promise. I just need a little more time." The word "please" began to appear at the bottom of the page. The HOA filed a lien against the property. When that went unanswered, they moved to foreclose. The law in Florida and many other states was on their side. A judge presented with a clear paper trail of debt granted the writ of possession. Arthur McCready was to be evicted from his home of nearly 40 years. The day of the eviction was a Tuesday in early September. The Florida heat was a physical weight. Richard Hayes decided to oversee the procedure personally. He brought the HOA's property manager, a large pragmatic man named Carl, and a county sheriff's deputy to enforce the writ. They pulled up to 1842 Pelican Lane. The place was unnaturally still. The grass was a brown, knee-high jungle. A sprawling spiderweb, glistening with dew, connected the front door frame to a wilted azalea bush. The air carried a faint, sickly sweet odor that none of them could quite place. Richard marched up the driveway, his polo shirt crisp, the HOA logo on his chest like a shield. He held the court order in his hand. He knocked on the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. "Mr. McCready, this is Richard Hayes from the HOA. We have a court order." "You need to open up." Silence. He knocked again, harder. "Arthur, this is your final warning. We are coming in, nothing." He nodded to the deputy, who produced a master key. The lock turned with a definitive click. The door swung inward. The smell hit them first. It was a solid wall of decay, so thick and cloying it felt like walking into a physical object. It was the smell of time, of biology, of an ended story. Carl, the property manager, immediately backpedaled, his face turning green. He stumbled to the azalea bush and vomited. Deputy Evans, his training kicking in, radioed for backup and the coroner, his voice tight and professional. But Richard Hayes stood frozen in the foyer, his polished loafers sticking slightly to the grimy tile. He peered into the gloom of the living room, and he saw him. Arthur McCready was sitting in his favorite armchair, positioned towards the dark, blank screen of the television. He was wearing his bathrobe. His body was desiccated, shrunken into itself, skin pulled taut like leather over bone. One skeletal hand rested on the chair's arm. The other lay in his lap, cradling a framed photograph of Eleanor. He had been dead for at least 6 months. On the side table, next to a half-empty cup of tea that had become an ecosystem of mold, was the stack of HOA notices. And on top of the stack, the notepad. The final, barely legible entry read, "I will fix it. Please, time didn't stop." It simply revealed that it had been lying to them all along. The world had kept turning while Arthur McCready sat in his chair, waiting for a little more time that would never come. The official cleaning crew, a biohazard team, refused to go back after the first day. They complained of equipment failure, lights flickering, fans cutting out. One of them, a man named Hector, swore he heard an old man's voice whisper from a radio that had been playing static. "I'm not finished yet." The house was empty, but it was no longer quiet. It was full of a silence that was now listening. And it was waiting for its next occupants. So now you know how it began. With paper and silence, and a debt that could never be repaid. But what happens when a house absorbs that much loneliness, that much neglect? It doesn't just become empty. It becomes hungry. And the story of 1842 Pelican Lane was far from over. Before we continue, ask yourself one more time, are you alone? Or is your house listening to the sound of your breathing right now? Subscribe, because the horror is just beginning. The next chapter awaits. You've felt it, haven't you? That sudden chill in a warm room. The sense that a space once empty is now occupied. What if a house could remember? Not just events, but emotions. The deep crushing weight of loneliness. the sharp sting of betrayal. If that were true, then 1842 Pelican Lane had become a living memory of Arthur Macready's final days. And memories have a way of demanding to be heard. Before we go deeper, I need you to be honest with me. Is there a door in your home that's slightly ajar right now? A closet you haven't opened today? Look at it, notice it. Because in Cypress Cove, the doors were just beginning to open. The official report called it death by natural causes, a massive heart attack, no foul play. The case was closed. But for the residents of Cypress Cove, the real story was just beginning. The house at 1842 Pelican Lane stood as a silent, shameful monument. The HOA, desperate to erase the stain, hired a flipper named Marco Silva, a man who believed in profit, not ghosts. He saw a solidly built house in a prime location, a handyman special. He could turn into a quick fortune. On his first day, Marco entered with a sledgehammer and a crew of day laborers. The air was still and heavy, smelling of bleach and fresh paint, a desperate attempt to mask the past. His workers, however, were uneasy. Tools disappeared from one room only to be found in another. The new locks he'd installed were found unlocked in the morning. The circuit breaker for the living room tripped constantly for no apparent reason. Triste, one of the laborers muttered in Spanish. Sad. The house is sad. Marco dismissed it. Sadness isn't structural. Let's move. His goal was to gut the interior, starting with the living room carpet. He rented a heavy-duty carpet cutter. As he peeled back the thick stained padding, he uncovered the original hardwood floor. And that's when his blood ran cold. The floorboards were covered in carvings. Not random scratches, but precise, meticulous lines of numbers and symbols. Complex mathematical equations, orbital calculations, burn time formulas. The language of an aerospace engineer. It was a frantic, sprawling map of a brilliant mind, unraveling in the dark. And in the center of it all, carved with the desperate force of a man trying to claw his way out of his own reality, was a single, stark sentence: the final notice is for you. Marco Silva dropped his carpet cutter. The sound echoed in the empty house. He didn't take a picture. He didn't call his crew. He simply walked out, got in his truck, and drove away. He forfeited his deposit and never returned. The house, he told a friend later, wasn't haunted. It was cursed. Not by a spirit, but by a thought. A single terrifying thought that had been carved into its very bones. The story of the carvings spread through the neighborhood, mutating with each telling. They were coordinates to a hidden treasure. They were the names of other HOA targets. They were a summoning circle. Meanwhile, Richard Hayes was beginning to unravel. The image of Arthur in that chair was burned onto his retina. He started sleeping with the lights on. He began to notice things. Small things. The smell of Earl Grey tea, Arthur's favorite, would waft through his house at random times. The stack of mail on his own kitchen counter would be subtly rearranged in the morning, with HOA notices always on top. One night, at exactly 3:02 a.m., he was jolted awake by a sound. Not a bang or a crash. It was the soft, crisp, unmistakable sound of an envelope being torn open. It was coming from his home office. Heart pounding, he crept downstairs. His office was dark, but centered perfectly on his desk blotter was a single sheet of paper. It was one of Arthur Macready's final violation notices, the one detailing the fond $200 lien. Richard stared at it, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. He had never brought this paperwork home. It was locked in the HOA office. He crumpled the paper and threw it away. The next morning, it was back on his blotter. The haunting had begun, but it wasn't a traditional haunting. There were no floating apparitions or spectral moans. This was a bureaucratic haunting, a supernatural enforcement of the covenant. Other residents started experiencing it, too. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had never delivered her cookies, began having vivid nightmares of Arthur standing at her window, silently holding a stack of mail. She'd wake up and for 3 days, her own mail would fail to arrive. The post office had no explanation. The Patterson family's smart TVs would turn on by themselves at 2 a.m., the screens filled with scrolling, endless lists of numbers. Their toddler began pointing to an empty corner of his room and babbling about the sad man with the numbers. The HOA's authority, once absolute, was being systematically dismantled by an entity it could not fine, could not lean and could not evict. Driven to the brink, Richard Hayes installed a state-of-the-art security system at his own home. Cameras covered every angle. One Sunday morning, reviewing the footage, he saw it. The motion-activated camera on his back patio had triggered at 3:18 a.m. The video showed a figure standing at the edge of the frame, half hidden in the shadows of an oak tree. It was too grainy to see a face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. An old man, slightly stooped, wearing a bathrobe. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, one hand extended, pointing directly at Richard's home office window. In its other hand, it held a simple white envelope. Richard Hayes stared at the frozen image. This was no longer about guilt or bad publicity. This was an audit, and Arthur McReady was finally submitting his final bill. A house that carves messages into its own skin. A ghost that delivers violation notices. This was the new reality for Cypress Cove. But what happens when the haunting isn't confined to one property? When the entire neighborhood becomes part of the ledger? The answer lies in the next chapter. But first, pause this. Go check your own mail. Look at the envelopes. Do any of them feel colder than the others? When you're ready, join me. The story is about to claim its next victim. There is a unique kind of fear that comes not from a knock at the door, but from the mail slot, from the innocuous rustle of paper that carries a final verdict. In Cypress Cove, the residents were learning that some debts follow you home, that the system you empowered can turn on you. And the question is no longer if your house is listening, but what it's learning about you. Check the clock. What time is it? If it's close to 3 a.m., you might want to turn on all the lights. The witching hour is just a concept. The accounting hour, however, is very, very real. Richard Hayes was a man built on a foundation of procedure. Now that foundation was cracking, and something cold and dark was seeping through. The phantom smell of Earl Grey had become a constant presence in his home. He'd find his carefully organized files subtly rearranged, with Arthur McReady's case always on top. It was a silent, relentless correction. The haunting was meticulously administrative. It began with his email. At 3:02 a.m., an email would send itself from his account to the entire HOA board. The subject line was always the same. Have you checked your mail? The body was always blank. Then came the phone calls. His private landline would ring. On the other end, no one. Just the sound of static, and beneath it, the faint whispery rustle of paper. Once he heard a voice, old and tired, barely audible. The fees are accruing. He changed his phone number. The calls started again the next night. The final straw was the ledger. He woke to find a single sheet of paper on his bedside table. It was not a HOA form. It was a simple hand-drawn ledger. Charge amount neglect, 3-month silence, 8 calls delay, 14 letters disregard, ongoing outcome pending at the bottom. Where the board president's signature should be, was a single, shakily written name, McReady. Richard felt a terror he had never known. This wasn't a poltergeist throwing dishes. This was an audit from beyond the grave. He was being held accountable line by line for his failures. He wasn't the only one. The haunting had begun to metastasize, spreading through Cypress Cove like a virus. It targeted those who were complicit through their silence. Carol Gable's punishment was her garden. She woke one morning to find every single one of her prize-winning roses dead, not wilted, desiccated, as if they had been drained of all life. And tucked into the thorny branches of one bush was a faded, water-stained coupon for a pizza delivery service, the same one that had been in Arthur's mail stack. The Patterson family's punishment was their technology. Their Wi-Fi network name changed overnight to I Will Fix It. When they tried to change it back, all their smart devices, thermostats, lights, TVs displayed a single, scrolling line of text. I just need a little more time. Their toddler, who had started speaking in full sentences, now only repeated one phrase over and over. Please, just time. The neighborhood was being systematically broken down. The social contract of polite indifference had been weaponized against them. They had chosen not to see Arthur, and now Arthur was making sure they saw everything. Panicked, Richard Hayes called an emergency closed-door HOA board meeting. The atmosphere in the room was thick with dread. The other board members, a tax attorney, a retired school principal, a local business owner, looked pale and shaken. They had all experienced their own violations. We need to sell that house, the tax attorney said, his voice tight. We liquidate the asset and be done with it. And who do we sell it to? The principal snapped. "The entire state knows its history. It's a radioactive pariah." As they argued, the lights in the conference room flickered. The digital projector turned on by itself, casting a blinding white square onto the screen. Then words began to appear, one letter at a time, as if an invisible hand was typing. UAREALLINARREARS. Richard stared, his mouth dry. "It's a prank." "A hacker!" A soft rhythmic sound began to echo through the ventilation system. Tap, 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 tap. It was the sound of a pen, Arthur's favorite fountain pen. He realized with a jolt, tapping impatiently on a desk. The tax attorney stood up, his chair screeching. "I'm not staying here." He marched to the door and pulled the handle. It was locked. From the outside, that's when the smell hit them. Not decay this time, but the distinct cloying scent of old paper, dust, and the faint metallic tang of the ink from a cheap printer cartridge. The smell of the HOA's own filing cabinet. From under the conference room door, envelopes began to slide through. Dozens of them, hundreds. A silent paper flood of every violation notice, every late fee, every legal threat the HOA had ever issued. They piled up around their ankles, a rising tide of their own bureaucratic cruelty. The retired principal began to cry, soft, helpless sobs. "We were just following the rules," she whispered. The tapping from the vents stopped. In the sudden absolute silence, a single clear sentence was spoken. The voice was dry, raspy, and held the quiet authority of an engineer stating an undeniable fact. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The rules have been amended." The door to the conference room clicked, unlocked. The board members fled, not looking back, leaving the sea of paper behind them. Richard Hayes was the last to leave. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He turned. The hallway was empty, but pinned to the wall with a single rusty pushpin was a new notice. It was addressed to him, "Violation, gross negligence of human spirit. Fine your peace of mind. Payable immediately. Status delinquent." He knew then, with a certainty that froze his soul, that this was only the beginning of the foreclosure process. The house at 1842 Pelican Lane was not just a haunted structure. It had become the central office for a new supernatural HOA, and every single resident of Cypress Cove was now in violation. They thought they were safe behind their rules and their ledgers. They were wrong. The most powerful phantom is not a person, but a principle. And when a principle is violated, the reckoning is absolute. The residents of Cypress Cove are about to learn the true meaning of compliance. But this story has one more player, someone who loved the man inside the bureaucracy. Her name is Sarah, and she's coming home. The final chapter is next. But first, look at your own hands. Are they clean? Or do they too have the faint, stubborn scent of paper and ink? When you're ready, the final reckoning awaits. What does a house become when the person who gave it a heartbeat is gone? Is it just wood and nails? Or does it become a living, breathing archive of a life? Every laugh absorbed into the drywall, every tear soaked up by the floorboards. For Sarah McCready, her father's house was no longer just a structure. It was a living memory, a testament to a brilliant mind that had been systematically erased by the very world he helped build. And now she was about to learn that some echoes are so powerful, they refuse to fade into silence. Before we continue, I want you to pause for a moment. Look at a family photograph in your own home. Look into the eyes of the person you love. Now imagine if the walls around you could project that love back at you, or the pain of their absence. What would your home say? When you're ready, let's step back into the story. Sarah did not sleep that first night. The silence in 1842 Pelican Lane was not a passive absence of sound. It was an active, listening presence. She had set up a small camping cot in the living room, unable to bear the thought of sleeping in her old bedroom, let alone her father's. The bare floorboards were cold beneath her thin mattress, and the emptiness of the house seemed to press in on her from all sides, a physical weight on her chest. She lay in the dark, the digital voice recorder clutched in her hand like a rosary. She had listened to her father's message a dozen times, each playthrough carving his despair deeper into her soul. The debt is theirs, not mine. The words echoed in the stillness. He hadn't been ranting. Even in his confusion, the engineer in him had been trying to solve a problem. The problem of his own erasure. A little after 2 a.m., the tapping started again. Not from the bedroom this time. It was closer. Right beside her cot. Tap, 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 tap. The same good-night pattern. Her breath hitched. She didn't open her eyes. She just lay there, frozen, listening. The sound wasn't menacing. It was expectant. It was a question. "Are you still here? Are you listening?" "I'm listening, Dad," she whispered into the darkness. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her own heartbeat. Then a new sound began. It was the soft, shuffling slide of paper. It was the unmistakable sound of mail being sorted. She remembered it clearly from her childhood. Her father at the kitchen counter, methodically going through the day's envelopes, separating bills from personal letters. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Curiosity, a force stronger than fear, compelled her to rise. She padded quietly into the kitchen, her phone's flashlight cutting a weak beam through the profound dark. The counter was empty. The sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from under the small kitchen table. She directed the beam downward. There on the floor was a small, neat pile of envelopes. They were faded and yellowed, their corners curled. They hadn't been there an hour ago. She knelt, her pulse throbbing in her ears. The top envelope was a final notice from the HOA. The next was a warning about the lawn. Delinquency notice, lien notification, a perfect, horrifying timeline of her father's financial death. She picked up the one on the bottom. It was different. It was a letter from him, to her mother, Eleanor. The postmark was just a week after her mother's funeral. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "My dearest Eleanor," it began in his precise engineer's script. "The house is too quiet without you. I keep expecting to hear you humming in the kitchen. Sarah called today. She sounds so much like you. It's a comfort and an agony all at once. I paid the HOA fee today. I almost forgot. You were always the one who remembered these things. I feel like I'm forgetting so much these days. It's like parts of me are slowly powering down, one system at a time. I miss you, my love. More than all the stars you now call home." A tear splashed onto the paper, blurring the ink. This wasn't a ghost showing her horror. It was showing her his heart. The house wasn't just replaying his final, desperate days. It was replaying his entire life, his love, his grief. It was all here, preserved in this strange, spectral archive. The following morning, fortified by a sleepless night and a grim determination, Sarah began her own investigation. She was a lawyer, and she approached this like a case. The enemy was the Cypress Cove HOA, and the evidence was all around her. She started with the living room floor, with the carvings Marco Silva had fled from. In the daylight, they were even more chilling. The mathematical equations weren't random. As she studied them, she recognized orbital decay formulas, calculations for re-entry trajectories. He was calculating the downfall of something. And then she saw it, carved near the baseboard. A complex equation that, when she mentally solved it, resulted in a date. The date the HOA had filed for foreclosure. A cold certainty settled over her. Her father, in his cognitive decline, had used the only language he truly understood, mathematics, to try and make sense of his own destruction. He had mapped the HOA's actions like a celestial event, predicting the inevitable collision. Her next step was to confront Richard Hayes. She found him at the HOA office, a bland beige building that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet authority. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were shadowed, his hands jittery. "Miss McCready," he said, his voice strained. There are no words." "There are, Mr. Hayes," Sarah said, her voice cold and level. She placed a copy of her father's final notice on his desk. "There are plenty of words. Delinquent, lien, foreclosure. My father wasn't a line item on your ledger. He was a man who helped put hardware in orbit around this planet. And you treated him like a faulty appliance that needed to be disposed of." Richard flinched. "The rules. The covenants. We have a responsibility to all the homeowners." "Don't," Sarah cut him off, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare hide behind your rulebook. Your responsibility left a man to rot in his own home for 6 months. Your community is a beautifully painted lie." She leaned forward, her palms flat on his desk. "I'm not here to sue you, Richard, not yet. I'm here to give you a chance. Resign, disband this monster you've created, before it consumes you too." He stared at her, a mixture of fear and defiance in his eyes. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. Sarah said, straightening up. "I'm warning you. The house knows what you did, and it has a much longer memory than you do." She turned and walked out, leaving him sitting in the sterile silence of his office. That night, Richard Hayes' home security system recorded hours of footage of his own shadow, cast by no visible light source, pacing relentlessly back and forth in his living room. The figure in the shadow was holding a stack of papers. Back at 1842 Pelican Lane, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let her father's story end in tragedy. She would make the house a monument, not a tomb. She began bringing in boxes of his things from storage, his model airplanes, his books, his photographs. She hung a picture of him and her mother on the bare living room wall. She placed his favorite chair back in its spot, not as a shrine to his death, but as a celebration of his life. As she worked, the house responded. The oppressive silence began to lift, replaced by a gentle, almost peaceful hum. The cold spots warmed. One evening, as she was reading one of his old engineering journals on his chair, she caught a faint scent of Old Spice, and unmistakably, her mother's jasmine perfume. She didn't jump. She just smiled, a sad, grateful smile. The house was no longer a machine of grief. It was becoming a home again. It was remembering how to be loved, but the story wasn't over. The HOA had scheduled an emergency meeting. Richard Hayes, backed into a corner, was preparing to fight back. He had a new motion on the table, to condemn 1842 Pelican Lane as a public nuisance and have it demolished. The final battle for Arthur McCready's legacy was about to begin. And the house, now with its keeper firmly inside its walls, was ready. A daughter's love against an empire of rules. A memory fighting for its right to exist. Sarah McCready has drawn a line in the sand, but the tide of bureaucracy is relentless. The HOA isn't just going to let her win. They see her father's house as a stain to be removed, a problem to be solved. But they have yet to understand that the problem has evolved. It's no longer a confused old man in a chair. It's a brilliant lawyer, armed with the truth, standing in a house that has chosen its side. The confrontation is coming, and when it does, the very foundation of Cypress Cove will shake. Are you ready to see what happens when a policy tries to erase a person, and that person fights back? You've felt it, haven't you? That creeping sensation that the walls of your own home are not just watching, but recording. That every argument, every moment of silence, every secret whispered in the dark is being absorbed, filed away in the very studs and drywall. For the residents of Cypress Cove, this was no longer a paranoid fantasy. It was their terrifying new reality. The house at 1842 Pelican Lane had stopped merely remembering. It had started reporting, and its ledger of grievances was about to be made public in the most horrifying way imaginable. Before we descend into this new circle of suburban hell, I need you to do something. Go to your window. Look out at your neighborhood. See those houses all so neat, so separate. Now ask yourself, what sins are they hiding behind their perfectly painted doors? And what if one house decided to expose them all? When you're ready to learn the terrible price of conformity, turn the page. The reckoning begins now. The emergency HOA meeting was convened in the sterile, fluorescent-lit community center, a building that usually hosted toddler playgroups and homeowner mixers. Tonight, it felt more like a bunker preparing for a siege. Richard Hayes stood at the podium, a man visibly crumbling. The crisp polo shirt hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes darted around the room, never settling, as if expecting an attack from the very air vents. He was a ghost of the confident bureaucrat he had once been, haunted not by a specter, but by the unshakable certainty of his own damnation. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The motion on the floor, he began, his voice raspy, is to declare that property at 1842 Pelican Lane a public nuisance and to petition the county for its immediate demolition. A murmur rippled through the assembled board members and the handful of brave residents who had come to witness the proceedings. Carol Gable sat in the back, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The Pattersons had not come. They had boarded up their windows and refused to leave their home after their toddler had begun sleepwalking, leading them to the living room each night to point at a blank wall and whisper, "He's doing the numbers." Before Richard could continue, the main door to the community center creaked open. Every head turned. Sarah McCready stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. She did not look like a grieving daughter anymore. She looked like an avenging angel. Dressed in a dark, tailored pantsuit, her posture was ramrod straight, her gaze sweeping the room with cold, analytical precision. In one hand, she held a thick, legal-sized binder. In the other, her father's digital voice recorder. "The floor is not yours to control, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice cutting through the room with the clean, sharp edge of a scalpel. "Not anymore." Richard's face paled. "This is a closed session, Miss McCready. You will have to leave." "I think not," she replied, walking slowly down the center aisle. The click of her heels on the linoleum was the only sound. "You see, I am here on behalf of a constituent, a very persistent one." She stopped at the front and placed the binder on the podium, gently moving Richard aside. He was too stunned to resist. "My father, Arthur McCready, was not a nuisance. He was a casualty of your heartless, unthinking system. But he was also a brilliant man. And in his final days, he did what he did best. He gathered data. He observed. He calculated." She held up the voice recorder. "He left a record, and this house, his house, has been kind enough to help me complete it." She pressed play. Static hissed from the room's PA system, and then Arthur's fragile, determined voice filled the space, echoing off the walls. Log entry. "The pattern is clear. It is not random. Hayes, financial distress. 2018 medical bills from his son's illness. He became stricter after that. Gable, fear of solitude. Projected her own isolation. Refused to check on others. Patterson, obsessed with property value. Saw neighbors as investments, not people. The system doesn't just enforce rules. It selects for the cruelest interpretation of them. I have mapped the decay. The neighborhood is the satellite and the HOA is the gravity well, pulling it all into the dark." The recording stopped. The room was frozen. Richard Hayes looked as if he'd been physically struck. No one outside his family knew about his son's medical debt. Carol Gable had buried her face in her hands. "This binder," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, "contains every secret this neighborhood has ever tried to hide. The zoning variances Hayes illegally granted to his brother-in-law. The embezzlement from the community pool fund by the former treasurer. The fact that the historical land the community center is built on was actually a pauper's cemetery. A fact the original developers and this HOA have conspired to hide for decades." Panic began to bloom on the faces of the board members. This was no longer about one house. This was about the exposure of the rotten core of Cypress Cove itself. "And how," Richard stammered, finding his voice, "could you possibly know any of that? Those are lies." Sarah smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The house told me." As if on cue, the lights in the community center flickered. The large projection screen behind her hummed to life. But instead of the HOA logo, it displayed a frantic, real-time cascade of numbers and equations. Arthur's calculations from the living room floor. They swirled and resolved, not into orbital paths, but into social connections, financial transactions, a horrifying map of the neighborhood's hidden corruption. Then, the images began. Security camera footage from the Pattersons' home, showing Mr. Patterson burying contaminated soil from his construction business in his backyard at 2 a.m. A scanned image of a forged signature on a HOA document from years ago. A private email from Carol Gable to a friend, mocking Arthur's senile forgetfulness weeks before he died. The house was not just a memory. It was a whistleblower. It had become a central intelligence agency for the entire neighborhood, using its inexplicable connection to every Wi-Fi network, every smart device, every digital fingerprint, to compile a dossier of every sin committed in its shadow. Screams erupted in the room. People stood, chairs scraping, pointing at the screen in horror and denial. "This is impossible." "Hackers," someone yelled, but Sarah knew the truth. The horror was not digital. It was spiritual. The collective guilt, the hidden lies, the quiet betrayals. They had all been absorbed by the psychic wound that was 1842 Pelican Lane. The house had become a dark mirror, and it was finally forcing them all to look at their reflections. Richard Hayes backed away from the podium, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the exposure of his secrets. He was staring at the projection screen, but he wasn't seeing the data. He was seeing something else, "Stop it," he whispered. Then louder, "Stop it!" On the screen, the numbers dissolved. In their place was a live feed. It was the view from his own home security camera, the one in his living room. And in the feed, clear as day, a figure sat in his favorite armchair. It was Arthur McCready, not a silhouette, not a shadow. He was there in high definition, wearing his bathrobe. He was looking directly into the camera, and in his hand, he held not a photograph of Eleanor, but a single, white envelope. He lifted his other hand, and with a slow, deliberate finger, he pointed directly at Richard Hayes. The community center descended into pure chaos. People scrambled for the exits, tripping over each other in their panic. But the doors were locked. The windows, when someone tried to open them, wouldn't budge. They were trapped in a room with their own worst secrets, and the ghost of the man they had killed was their warden. Sarah stood her ground, watching it all unfold. This was the justice her father had calculated. Not a lawsuit, not a fine, a full, systemic, and utterly terrifying audit. And as the screams of her neighbors filled the air, a new sound began to emanate from the walls of the community center itself. It was a soft, rhythmic, and infinitely patient sound. Tap, 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 tap. The final notice had been delivered. Payment was now due, and so the walls truly have ears and eyes, and a memory longer than any of us can comprehend. The HOA sought to erase one man, and in doing so they created a monster that knows all their sins. But what is the final penalty? What happens when the ledger is full and the debt is called in? The final chapter is upon us, a chapter of judgment, of consequences, and of a terrible, chilling peace. But before we reach the end, I must ask you one last haunting question. As you sit in your own home, surrounded by your own secrets, what would your house say about you? The final reckoning for Cypress Cove is next. There is a moment in every great storm where the wind suddenly dies, and the world holds its breath. That moment is not peace. It is the universe gathering its strength for the final cataclysmic blow. In Cypress Cove, that silence has fallen. The screams have faded. The panic has frozen into a tableau of pure, petrified terror. The ghost has been seen. The secrets have been spilled, and the doors are still locked. Now the residents huddle in their fluorescent-lit prison, waiting for the sentence to be passed. What is the appropriate punishment for a community that allowed a man to turn to dust in his favorite chair? Is it fines, imprisonment, or something far, far older and far more poetic? Before we witness the final act of this American tragedy, I want you to truly feel the weight of this silence. Pause this. Sit in the quiet of your own room. Listen to the nothingness. And in that nothingness, ask yourself, if you were judged not by a court of law but by the very home you live in, what would your verdict be? When you are ready to hear the fate of Cypress Cove, press play. The judgment begins now. The chaos in the community center had not subsided. It had simply transformed. The raw, screaming panic had curdled into a thick, suffocating dread. People were no longer scrambling mindlessly. They stood in small, shivering clusters, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the projection screen at the front of the room. The live feed from Richard Hayes' living room was still displayed, a window into a domestic nightmare. Arthur McCready sat unmoving in the armchair. He hadn't vanished. He was simply waiting. Richard Hayes was on his knees before the podium, his body racked with silent sobs. The facade of the powerful HOA president had been utterly annihilated, leaving behind a shell of a man confronting the incontrovertible evidence of his own damnation. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words meant for the image on the screen, for the ghost in his home, for the daughter standing over him. "I didn't know. I never thought." Sarah McCready looked down at him, her face a mask of complex emotions, pity, rage, and a profound, weary satisfaction. The legal binder, filled with the neighborhood's crimes, lay forgotten on the podium. It was obsolete. The trial was over. This was now the sentencing phase. "It's not just about you, Richard," Sarah said, her voice low but carrying through the terrified hush. "It was never just about you. It was about all of you." Her gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with Carol Gable, who flinched as if struck, with the other board members who looked away in shame. "You built a kingdom of rules and forgot you were supposed to be a community of people. You valued your property lines more than your neighbors' lives." As if her words were a cue, the environment in the community center began to change. The first sign was the temperature. The sterile air-conditioned chill evaporated, replaced by oppressive, muggy heat that felt distinctly Floridian, carrying with it the faint, ghostly scent of night-blooming jasmine and cut grass. It was the exact feeling of a Cypress Cove evening, but compressed, concentrated within the four walls of the building. Then, the walls themselves began to breathe. It was not a metaphor. The beige drywall seemed to pulse inward and outward with a slow, rhythmic cadence. A low vibrational hum filled the air, the sound of 1,000 whispers just below the threshold of hearing. From the ceiling, a fine gray dust began to sift down, smelling of aged paper and dry rot. The smell of the HOA's own filing cabinets, the smell of Arthur's abandoned home. What is this? A woman shrieked, brushing the dust from her hair. But the true horror was yet to come. The projection screen flickered and the image of Arthur in Richard's house vanished. In its place, the screen split into dozens of smaller squares like a security monitor. But these weren't live feeds from around the neighborhood. They were memories. Not recorded memories, but memories being pulled directly from the minds of the people in the room and projected for all to see. One square showed Carol Gable, years younger, deliberately looking away as a confused Arthur McCready struggled to get his groceries from his car to his front door. The memory was from her perspective, laced with her own internal monologue. I should help. No, he'll think I'm nosy. It's not my problem. Another square showed Mr. Patterson laughing with a friend at a barbecue, joking about old man McCready and his jungle lawn, speculating that he'd finally lost his marbles. A third showed a younger Richard Hayes, at an earlier board meeting, coldly vetoing a proposal to create a wellness check program for elderly residents living alone. It's a liability nightmare, his remembered voice stated flatly. We're a homeowners association, not a social services agency. The room became a gallery of their collective sin. Every averted gaze, every unkind thought, every moment of selfishness and willful ignorance was broadcast for their neighbors to see. There was no hiding. There was no denial. The house, acting as a psychic amplifier, was forcing them to not only see Arthur's truth, but to relive their own complicity in high definition. But the house was not content with showing them the past. It began to show them the future. The memory squares dissolved, reforming into a single horrifying image. It was a view of Cypress Cove, but a Cypress Cove that was empty. The lawns were perfectly manicured, the houses freshly painted, the streets pristine. But there were no people, no children playing, no cars in driveways. The only movement was the flutter of a single piece of paper, a HOA violation notice, tumbling down the center of the deserted road like a tumbleweed. It was a vision of their perfect, orderly world, achieved at the ultimate cost, their very humanity. A neighborhood that had perfected itself into a ghost town. A collective moan of despair rose from the residents. This was their legacy. This was what their rules had been building towards all along. It was then that Arthur on the screen finally moved. He slowly, deliberately, opened the white envelope he had been holding. He did not pull out a sheet of paper. Instead, he tilted the envelope, and a fine black dust poured out into his palm. It was the ashes of all the notices, all the threats, all the legal documents that had haunted his final days. He lifted his hand to his lips and blew. On the screen, the black dust swirled. In the community center, the same dust materialized from the air, coalescing in the center of the room. It spun like a miniature tornado, and as it spun, it began to form letters, words, sentences that hung in the air, written in ashes, the judgment of Cedar Kovicharge, gross negligence of the human spirit. Sentence, remembrance, effective, immediately. The words hung there, shimmering with a dark light. Then they dissolved, and the ash fell to the floor, forming a perfect black circle. For a long moment, nothing happened. The oppressive heat vanished. The breathing of the walls stilled. The hum faded away. The doors to the community center unlocked with a series of soft, consecutive clicks. The spell was broken. People stumbled toward the exits, weeping, gasping, not looking at each other. They fled into the night, desperate to escape the room where they had been so completely and utterly seen. But as they returned to their homes, they would discover the true meaning of the sentence. Remembrance for Richard Hayes. It meant that every mirror in his house would now reflect the image of Arthur McCready sitting in his chair. He would never be able to look at his own reflection again without seeing the man he had killed. For Carol Gable, it meant that her beloved garden would never again grow anything but the same species of wilted brown flowers that had died on Arthur's property. Her attempts to plant new life would fail over and over again. For the Patterson family, their smart home system was permanently locked. The thermostat was fixed at 78 degrees, the temperature the coroner had estimated Arthur's body had been when it was found. The screens would only display the time and a single scrolling line: "I just need a little more time." The neighborhood was not destroyed. It was cursed to forever remember what it had done. The perfection of Cypress Cove would remain, but it would be a perfection forever stained. A beautiful mask hiding a festering, unforgettable wound. Sarah was the last to leave the community center. She walked back to 1842 Pelican Lane alone. The house was quiet, but the silence was different now. It was no longer heavy with grief or rage. It was a peaceful silence, a completed silence. She walked inside and went to the living room. She ran her fingers over the carved equations on the floor. They felt calm, cold. The energy that had fueled them was spent. She knew her father was gone. Not just his body, but the angry, trapped echo of him. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. She sat in his chair, the one she had brought back, and looked out the window at the dark, silent houses of Cypress Cove. They had gotten their order. They had gotten their peace, but it was the order of a graveyard and the peace of the dead. And so the story of the Walking Dead house ends not with a bang, but with a silence that will last for generations. The HOA learned that some violations cannot be fined, and some debts cannot be paid with money. They are paid with memory, a permanent, inescapable living memory. So the next time you look at your own homeowners association rules, or even just the four walls of your own home, remember Arthur McCready. Remember that a house is not just wood and nails. It is a witness. It absorbs our laughter and our tears, our kindness and our cruelty, and sometimes when the balance tips too far into the dark, the house itself may decide to speak. The question is, are you listening to what your own home is trying to tell you? This has been the Chronicle of 1842 Pelican Lane. Sleep well, Cypress Cove, if you can.
What is the price of a perfect neighborhood? Is it the monthly fees, the strict rules, or is it something far more precious? Something you only notice when it's gone. Like the safety of your own child. Every community has a center, a pool, a park, a place where families gather. But what if that very place was hiding a secret so dark, so chilling, that it could turn your dream home into a waking nightmare? Before we begin, I want you to think about your own neighborhood. Is there a place everyone gathers? A pool? A clubhouse? Now look at your child or imagine one. Would you ever let them out of your sight there? What if the real danger wasn't in the deep end, but in the people hired to protect it? Subscribe, because what you are about to hear will change the way you see your community forever. The story begins now. The crystal clear water of the Cypress Springs community pool shimmered under the brutal Florida sun. For the Thompson family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their 8-year-old daughter Lily, it was the centerpiece of their new life. They had moved in just 2 weeks ago, trading the cramped chaos of a Miami apartment for the sprawling, manicured paradise of a planned community. The HOA president, a man named Mr. Henderson with a smile as polished as his golf clubs, had personally welcomed them. Safest community in the county, he'd said, his arm sweeping across the view of identical beige houses and emerald lawns. And that pool is the crown jewel. We pride ourselves on its cleanliness. Lily, of course, was in heaven. She was a water baby, a little fish who would have lived in the pool if allowed. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, she was practicing her handstands, while Mark and Emily lounged on adjacent chairs, soaking in the quiet satisfaction of their decision. It's so clean, Emily remarked, sipping her iced tea. I don't think I've ever seen a public pool without a single leaf in it. 24-hour maintenance crew, Mark said, nodding toward a group of 3 men in dark blue uniforms who were quietly skimming the surface and checking the chemical levels. HOA spares no expense. It's in the covenant. The crew worked with silent, efficient precision. They never made eye contact, never spoke to the residents. They were just there, a fixture, like the palm trees. It was Lily who noticed it first. She surfaced from a handstand, sputtering and wrinkling her nose. "Mommy, the water tastes funny." Emily leaned over the edge. "Don't drink the pool water, sweetie. It has chlorine." "It's not like chlorine," Lily insisted, treading water. "It's a spicy," Mark chuckled. "Spicy water? That's a new one." He dismissed it. Kids said the dar strangest things. But that night the first sign appeared. As Emily was giving Lily a bath, she noticed a faint red rash on her daughter's stomach and back. "'Twasn't severe, just a patchwork of tiny raised bumps. Probably just a reaction to the new sunscreen," Mark suggested, though a small, cold knot began to form in his stomach. The spicy water comment echoed in his mind. The next day, Emily took Lily to their new pediatrician. Dr. Evans was a kindly, older man who had served the community for decades. He examined the rash with a furrowed brow. He murmured. "Unusual. It looks almost like a very mild chemical burn. But not from chlorine. This is something different. Have you been swimming?" "The community pool," Emily said, her anxiety rising. Dr. Evans's face became carefully neutral. "I see. Well, keep her out of the water for a few days. Use this cream. It should clear up." But his eyes, as he showed them out, held a flicker of something unreadable. A warning? Or just professional curiosity? Driven by a growing unease, Mark decided to do a little research of his own. That evening, after Lily was asleep, he sat at his laptop and looked up the Cypress Springs HOA. The website was slick and professional, filled with pictures of smiling families and pristine amenities. He found the section on the pool. It listed the maintenance schedule. Full chemical treatment and filtration system overhaul every night between 2 k's a.m. and 4 sa a.m. Every night? That seemed excessive. And the timing was odd. Curiosity now a burning itch, he told Emily he was going for a late-night walk to clear his head. The neighborhood was eerily silent at 1:45 a.m. The streets empty, the houses dark. He found a bench shrouded in the shadows of a large oak tree, with a direct view of the pool gate. He didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2 a.m., a plain, unmarked white truck pulled up. Not the usual maintenance van. 3 figures got out. The same crew from the daytime, but their movements were different now. Faster, more purposeful. They unlocked the gate and began their work. But they weren't just skimming and testing. They were hauling large, heavy-duty plastic drums from the truck. The drums were unlabeled. With a system of hoses, they began pumping a thick, murky liquid from the drums directly into the pool's filtration intake valve. Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't standard maintenance. This was something else entirely. He pulled out his phone, zoomed in, and started recording. As he watched, one of the men looked up, his face illuminated by the truck's headlights. It was Mr. Henderson, the HOA president. He wasn't supervising. He was working, his sleeves rolled up, his expression grim and focused. The spicy water, the chemical rash, the secretive late-night rituals. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, and it was more terrifying than he could have imagined. The crown jewel of Cypress Springs wasn't just a pool. It was a secret, and Mark Thompson had just become the only resident on the outside, looking in. A father's instinct is a powerful thing. A whisper in the dark that tells you something is wrong. Mark Thompson has just heard that whisper. But what do you do when you discover the guardians of your paradise are the ones poisoning it? Do you run? Do you fight? Or do you dig deeper, into water so dark you might never surface? The truth is waiting in the deep end. But before we dive in, I have to ask you, is your own community pool a place of joy? Or something far more sinister? The next chapter is about to begin. Don't look away. The walk home from the pool felt like moving through a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to hold a watching eye, every softly lit window a potential threat. Mark's mind raced, replaying the scene on a loop. The unmarked truck, the unlabeled drums, Mr. Henderson's grim, focused face under the harsh glare of the headlights. The video on his phone felt less like evidence and more like a live grenade. He slipped back into his house, the lock clicking shut behind him with a sound of finality. The central air conditioning hummed. a normal sound that now felt alien and false. He stood in the dark kitchen, his heart hammering against his ribs, and poured himself a glass of water from the tap. He stared at it, the memory of Lily saying, "It's spicy," echoing in his head. He couldn't bring himself to drink it. Upstairs, he found Emily asleep, her face peaceful in the moonlight. He didn't wake her. The weight of what he'd seen was his to carry alone for now. He spent the rest of the night at his laptop, digging deeper into the digital footprint of Cypress Springs. He cross-referenced the community's newsletter with local missing persons reports. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. A teenager named Jason Miller, last seen biking near the community gates. An elderly woman, Helen Gable, who supposedly went to live with a relative out of state, but no one had actually heard from her. A young couple who argued about moving away, then simply vanished. In each case, the community pool had been closed for unscheduled maintenance within 48 hours of their disappearance. It was a pattern of consumption. The pool was eating people. The next morning, he showed Emily the video. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. The trusting, hopeful woman who had championed this move was gone, replaced by a protective mother lion. "We have to go to the police," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And say what?" Mark replied, his own voice low and strained. "That the HOA president is cleaning the pool at night? That we have a hunch based on a rash and some missing persons reports? They'll laugh us out of the station. Henderson probably plays golf with the police chief." They argued in hushed, frantic tones, the fear a tangible third presence in their sun-drenched kitchen. Finally, they agreed on a first step. They needed proof of what was in the water. Real scientific proof. Mark spent the day at a library, 3 towns over, using a public computer to research water testing labs. He found one that offered anonymous pay-in-cash analysis. Emily, meanwhile, devised the extraction plan. That evening, during the family swim hour, she went to the pool with Lily. While Lily played, Emily, her heart thundering in her chest, casually dipped a large, sterile sample vial into the water, filling it under the guise of adjusting her swimsuit. The act felt brazen, criminal. She expected a siren to blare for Henderson to materialize and grab her arm. But no one noticed. The other families splashed and laughed, blissfully unaware. The sample was mailed that same night from a post office miles away. The waiting was agony. 2 days later, the email arrived. The results were not just alarming, they were chilling. The water contained trace levels of chloroform, a sedative, along with a potent industrial-grade enzymatic compound the lab could only identify as Biodigest XT, a substance typically used in forensic cleanup to dissolve organic material. It was a cocktail designed for one purpose: to incapacitate and then disintegrate a human body. They were not just maintaining a pool, they were operating a dissolution tank. Armed with the lab report, Mark and Emily made their second mistake. They decided to confront one person they thought they could trust, Dr. Evans, the pediatrician. He had seen Lily's rash, he knew something was wrong. Surely he would help. They scheduled an appointment for a follow-up on Lily's rash. In the examination room, the cheerful posters of cartoon animals felt like a sick joke. When the nurse left, Mark placed the lab report on Dr. Evans's desk. The doctor's friendly demeanor evaporated. His face went ashen. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "You need to stop," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then tell us," Emily pleaded. "What is this? Why?" Dr. Evans looked at Lily, who was quietly coloring in a book, then back at her parents. His eyes were filled with a profound, weary sadness. "This community, it offers a certain kind of peace. Perfect, orderly peace, but that peace has a price. Some are willing to pay it. Others become part of the payment." He slid the lab report back to them. "Take your daughter, go on a long vacation, and when you come back, forget you ever saw this. It's the only way you all get to walk away." He stood up and left the room, leaving them sitting in the sterile silence, the truth now heavier and more terrifying than ever. They had sought an ally and found another guardian at the gate of this terrible secret. They were more alone than they could have ever imagined. and the pool was still open for business. An enemy in plain sight is one thing, but a warning from the one person you thought was a friend? That is a special kind of terror. The Thompson family now knows they are truly on their own. The system is not just corrupt, it is complete. So what do you do when there's no one left to trust? You become dangerous yourself. The next move is theirs, and it will take them from the quiet streets of Cypress Springs into a darkness they never knew existed. The stakes are about to get much, much higher. Don't go anywhere. The warning has been delivered, not by a shadowy figure in an alley, but by a respected doctor in a well-lit office. This is the true face of the horror in Cypress Springs. It wears the mask of normalcy. It speaks with the voice of authority, and it has just told the Thompson family to walk away. But how do you walk away from a truth that has already sunk its teeth into your life? How do you unsee what you've seen, when every time you look at your daughter, you're reminded of the poison in the water? The easy choice is to run. The right choice is to fight. But to fight a monster that has woven itself into the very fabric of your world, you must first become something you never wanted to be. You must become a hunter in your own hometown. Before we take the next step with them, ask yourself this. In their shoes, what would you be willing to become? A victim, a fugitive, or a weapon? The decision is made. The hunt begins now. The drive home from Dr. Evans's office was a silent, shell-shocked procession. The Florida sunshine, usually so bright and cheerful, now felt accusatory and harsh, illuminating a world that had been stripped of its innocence. Mark's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind a storm of rage and fear. Emily held Lily in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter, as if she could physically shield her from the grotesque reality they had just been forced to acknowledge. The doctor's words, others, become part of the payment, echoed in the car's tense atmosphere, a chilling confirmation of their worst suspicions. They were no longer investigating a mystery. They were navigating a minefield where the wrong step could make them the next unscheduled maintenance. Once inside, the lock on their front door felt flimsy, a laughable defense against the organized entity they were facing. They put on a cartoon for Lily in the living room, the animated laughter a stark, surreal contrast to the terror coiling in their guts. Retreating to their home office, they finally let the dam break. We have to call the police now, Mark. The state police, the FBI, someone. Emily's voice was a frantic whisper, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That doctor is an accessory to whatever this is, murder. He as much as admitted it. And what do we lead with, Emily? Mark shot back, his own fear manifesting as anger. He gestured wildly at the printed lab report on the desk. A water test from an anonymous lab? A video of a man doing his job even if it's at 2 a.m.? A pediatrician's vague warning? It's all circumstantial. They'll say we're paranoid, that we're causing a panic. Henderson will have a dozen witnesses ready to swear we're unstable. We'll lose credibility, and then we'll lose any chance of stopping this. He slammed his fist softly on the desk, the frustration of physical pain in his chest. We need something undeniable, something that connects Henderson and his crew directly to a victim. The grim reality settled over them. They were civilians, not detectives. They had no resources, no authority. All they had was desperation and a burning need to protect their child. It was Emily, her maternal fury crystallizing into a cold, sharp focus, who devised the new plan. Then we watch, she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. We don't sleep. We watch the pool every night. We document everything. The truck's license plate, the exact times, what those drums look like. We need a pattern, a routine we can predict. And so their new, harrowing routine began. They took shifts. While one slept, the other sat in the dark of their upstairs guest bedroom, which had a direct, albeit distant, view of the pool compound. They used the children's telescope from Lily's room, its cheerful pirate design a macabre accessory for their espionage. Mark bought a digital camera with a powerful optical zoom, paying in cash at a store 40 minutes away. They became students of the night, learning the language of their enemies' movements. The white truck always arrived between 1:55 and 2:05 a.m. There were always 3 men, their faces obscured by baseball caps in the darkness. They worked with an unnerving, silent efficiency for almost exactly 2 hours. On the 4th night of their vigil, Mark's persistence paid off. As the men were loading the empty drums back onto the truck, one of them fumbled, and a drum clattered loudly on the pavement. The man who emerged from the driver's side to check on the noise was Mr. Henderson. He wasn't in his usual polo shirt and khakis. He was dressed in dark utilitarian clothing. But it was what happened next that sent a jolt of electric terror through Mark. Another man emerged from the passenger side, and the interior dome light of the truck illuminated his face for a split second. It was Officer Dale Miller, the friendly, community-oriented cop who regularly patrolled their neighborhood, the one who had helped Lily fix her bicycle chain just last week. Mark lowered the camera, his hands trembling so violently he almost dropped it. The police were not the solution. The police were part of the problem. The system was not just corrupt, it was a closed, self-sustaining organism, and they were an infection it would soon try to eliminate. The video he had just captured was the undeniable proof they needed, but it was also a death sentence if it were discovered. They were no longer just hunters. They were now the prey, trapped inside the cage with the very creatures they were trying to expose. The walls of their beautiful new home had never felt so thin or so much like a prison. The following morning, the atmosphere in their house was thick with a new kind of dread. They were jumpy, starting at the sound of a passing car or the mail slot clattering. Emily homeschooled Lily, too afraid to let her out of their sight. The isolation was becoming another form of torture. They needed an ally, someone outside the suffocating bubble of Cypress Springs. That afternoon, Mark drove to the neighboring town of Oak Creek, and from a payphone outside a laundromat, made a call to the regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency. He posed as a concerned citizen, reporting suspicious chemical dumping at the Cypress Springs community pool. The woman on the phone was polite, took down the information and gave him a case number. It felt like a pathetic, hopeless gesture, throwing a pebble at a fortress. 2 days later, the fortress responded. A man in a crisp suit carrying a briefcase appeared on their doorstep. He introduced himself as Mr. Albright, from the HOA's legal firm. His smile was professional, his eyes were cold. "I understand you've had some concerns about the community pool, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We take the health and safety of our residents very seriously. We've conducted our own independent tests, which you are welcome to review." He handed Mark a thick, professionally bound report that declared the pool water perfectly within all state and federal safety guidelines. "It has come to our attention, however," Albright continued, his smile never wavering, "that you have been conducting your own unauthorized surveillance of community property after hours. This is a clear violation of Covenant 7B regarding resident conduct and privacy. We also have reports of you harassing our maintenance staff and spreading damaging rumors." He let the words hang in the air, a thinly veiled threat. "We would hate to see this escalate to a legal matter. It would be so stressful for your family, and so public." After he left, Mark stood frozen in the foyer, the legal report feeling like a lead weight in his hands. They weren't just being watched. They were being documented, boxed in by the very rules they were supposed to live under. The noose was tightening. That night, as Mark took his watch shift, he saw something new. The white truck arrived as usual, but tonight, after the drums were unloaded, one of the figures, Officer Miller, paused and stood by the pool fence. He didn't move. He just stood there in the dark and slowly, deliberately turned his head. He was looking directly at the Thompsons' house. He couldn't possibly see Mark in the dark window, but the message was as clear as if he'd shouted it. "We know you're watching. We see you. The hunt was over. The prey had been cornered, and the night was still young. They are seen. They are known. The walls are closing in, and the only way out is through a darkness deeper than they ever imagined. When the law is the enemy and your neighbors are the jury, what justice remains? There is one last, desperate play. A move so dangerous, so reckless that it borders on suicide. But when you have nothing left to lose, you risk everything. The final gambit is next. The point of no return is here. Don't you dare look away now." There is a moment in every confrontation when the masks come off, when the polite smiles vanish and you see the raw, unfiltered truth in your enemy's eyes. For the Thompson family, that moment is now. They have been seen. They have been threatened. The legal noose is tightening, and the man with the badge, the one sworn to protect them, is standing in the shadows, watching their home. This is no longer a secret investigation. This is a siege. And when you're under siege, there are only two choices: surrender and be consumed, or break the rules so completely that the entire system shatters around you. The Thompson family has made their choice. They are going to war. But to win, they must first descend into a darkness deeper than any midnight pool. They must become what they fear. Before we take this plunge with them, ask yourself, what line would you cross to save your child? And once you cross it, can you ever come back? The figure of Officer Miller, a stark silhouette against the blue-tinted darkness, did not move for a full 10 minutes. It was an eternity. Each second was a hammer blow against Mark's sanity, a silent declaration of war. The cop wasn't just looking at the house. He was surveying it, like a predator assessing the perimeter of a pen. When he finally turned and melted back into the pool compound, the normalcy of the night felt like a lie. The chirping crickets, the distant hum of a highway, it was all a backdrop to a nightmare. Mark stayed at the window until the white truck left, his body rigid, his mind a whirlwind of terror and a new, chilling resolve. Surrender was no longer an option. Dr. Evans had warned them to leave. The lawyer Albright had threatened them into silence. Now, the police were demonstrating their reach. They were trapped in a beautiful open-air prison, and the guards were preparing to make them disappear. He woke Emily, and in the harsh glow of a single bedside lamp, he told her what he had seen. There were no more tears, no frantic whispers. The fear had been refined into something harder, sharper, a diamond-edged determination. They're going to make their move soon, Mark said, his voice hollow. We're a liability now. We either run tonight and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, or we get the proof that burns this whole damn place to the ground. We burn it, Emily said, her eyes holding his without a flicker of doubt. For Lily, for everyone they've already taken. Their plan was born of desperation, a high-stakes gamble that made his hands sweat just to think of it. They couldn't just watch from the outside anymore. They needed to get inside the pool compound. They needed to see what happened during those 2 hours up close. They needed to plant a camera. The risk was astronomical. If they were caught, there would be no lawyers, no warnings. They would become the next organic material to be processed in the chlorinated depths. The next day was a blur of clandestine preparation, while Emily took Lily to a park 2 towns over, a flimsy excuse for a day trip. Mark drove to a large electronics store in a bustling city an hour away. He paid cash for a small magnetic weatherproof GPS tracker and 2 high-resolution wireless spy cameras with night vision and motion activation. They were the tools of a spy, and he felt like an imposter holding them, a simple engineer turned saboteur. The following night, the air was thick with a coming storm. The wind whispered through the palm fronds, providing a cover of natural sound. It was now or never. Dressed in black, their faces smudged with charcoal, Mark and Emily moved through their own backyard like ghosts. They had disabled the backyard motion sensor lights days ago, claiming a fault to the HOA. They slipped through a gap in the fence at the most overgrown point, entering the common area that bordered the pool. Every crunch of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. Every distant dog bark sent their hearts into their throats. The pool gate was locked with a heavy padlock. But Mark, using knowledge from his engineering days, had come prepared with a set of lockpicks he'd ordered online. His hands trembled, making the delicate work agonizingly slow. Emily kept watch, her body tense, her ears straining for any sound beyond the wind. After what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked open. The creak of the gate as they pushed it open was the loudest sound Mark had ever heard. The pool area at night was a profoundly alien place. The water, usually so inviting, was a sheet of black obsidian reflecting the churning, stormy sky. The empty loungers were like skeletal remains. The air was heavy with the cloying chemical smell they now knew was the scent of death. Working with frantic, silent efficiency, Emily placed one camera inside a fake rock near the filter intake, aimed at the main area where the drums were usually stationed. Mark, meanwhile, scaled the metal fence of the pump room enclosure, a small, locked shed that housed the pool's mechanical heart. He placed the second camera high up, wedged into a gap where a conduit pipe entered the building, giving a top-down view of the entire procedure. Lastly, he attached the magnetic GPS tracker to the underside of the white truck's rear bumper, his every nerve screaming that the vehicle would suddenly roar to life. They retreated as silently as they had come, relocking the gate behind them. Back in the safety of their dark bedroom, they huddled around Mark's laptop, the storm finally breaking outside. The camera feeds were live, showing 2 empty, green-tinted views of the pool area. They had done it. They had penetrated the inner sanctum. At 1:58 a.m., the white truck arrived. Right on schedule. But tonight was different. The routine was broken. Officer Miller and Mr. Henderson got out. But they were not alone. A third figure was with them, and they were dragging a fourth. A man, his feet stumbling, his head covered with a black hood. He was struggling weakly. Mark and Emily watched, frozen in horror, as the live feed showed the 3 men force the hooded man to his knees beside the pool. Henderson held up a tablet, showing the man something. A photo? A document? The hooded man shook his head violently. What happened next would be seared into their minds forever. Officer Miller, with a practiced, casual motion, drew his service weapon and pressed it against the back of the man's head. There was no hesitation. The gunshot was a muted pop on the audio feed, lost in the wind and rain. The man's body jerked and slumped forward. Then, with a chilling, bureaucratic efficiency, Henderson and the other man rolled the body into the pool. There was no splash. The dark, chemically saturated water seemed to swallow it whole. The 3 of them then proceeded with their normal routine, pumping the contents of the drums into the water as if they had simply taken out the trash. Mark slammed the laptop shut, lurching away from the desk to vomit into a trash can. Emily was sobbing silently, her entire body shaking. This was no longer about chemical disposal. This was the execution chamber, a liquid grave. They had the proof. They had filmed a murder committed by a homeowners association president and a police officer. The video on the laptop was the most valuable and dangerous object in the entire state of Florida. It was their salvation, and it was their death warrant. They have crossed the line. They have witnessed the unimaginable. But evidence this damning is a curse as much as a blessing. It makes them the most wanted people in Cypress Springs. Every second that laptop remains in their house is a second closer to their own demise. The storm is here. The floodgates are about to break. What happens when the hunted decide to become the hunters? The final desperate play is next. The end game begins now. You have just witnessed the unthinkable. A murder, cold and efficient, disguised as maintenance. The Thompson family now holds a truth so volatile, it could incinerate their lives in an instant. That video is a live wire, sparking in the storm-soaked darkness of their home. But what do you do with a weapon that could just as easily destroy you? Do you send it out into the world, a digital scream for justice, and pray it reaches the right ears before the enemy at your door kicks it down? Or do you hold it close, a burning secret while you plan your next move in a war you never asked to fight? The weight of that decision is crushing them. The clock is ticking, the storm is raging, and in the heart of Cypress Springs, a different kind of tempest is about to be unleashed. Before we witness the fallout, I need you to understand the cost of truth. Look at your own family. What would you sacrifice to keep them safe from a monster you helped create by simply moving in? The answer to that question begins now. The storm outside mirrored the cataclysm within the Thompson household. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howled like a chorus of the damned, and each flash of lightning illuminated their faces, frozen in a rictus of horror. The laptop sat, closed on the coffee table, an inert slab of plastic and metal that now contained an image of pure evil. Mark had not stopped shaking, a fine, constant tremor that ran through his hands and into his core. The clinical, almost bored expression on Officer Miller's face as he pulled the trigger was burned onto the back of Mark's eyelids. Emily had retreated into a frightening, silent stillness, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the blank television screen, seeing only the body being swallowed by the black water. They had the proof, the undeniable video evidence of premeditated murder. But it was a nuclear option, and the fallout would be indiscriminate. We have to send it, Mark finally rasped, his throat raw. Now. to every news station, the FBI, the state attorney's office. We blasted into the world before they realize we have it. And then what? Emily's voice was a ghost of itself, hollow and drained. We hit send, and then we wait. For them to come for us? For Lily? That video doesn't just prove they're killers, Mark. It proves we know. We are the only loose ends. Sending that video is our suicide note. The argument that followed was less a debate and more a desperate shared panic attack. They were trapped in a paradox of their own making. Keeping the video meant living with a time bomb in their house. Releasing it meant lighting the fuse. In the end, a grim, pragmatic compromise was reached. A plan born of sheer, terrified ingenuity. They would not send the video of the murder. Not yet. That was their final card. Instead, they would use the other footage, the footage of the chemical drums, the GPS tracker, to force the hand of someone who could not be ignored. While the storm still raged, Mark used sophisticated encryption software to create a secure digital package. It contained the less incriminating but still damning evidence, the time-stamped videos of the late-night chemical dumping, the lab report showing Biodigest XT, the GPS data from the truck showing its route from the pool to a remote industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the county, and a meticulously written anonymous statement detailing the connection to the missing persons. He did not mention Henderson or Miller by name, but the evidence pointed an unflinching finger. This package was not sent to the media. It was sent to a single, specific email address, that of a famously dogged and incorruptible investigative journalist at the Miami Herald, a woman named Elena Vargas, who had a reputation for taking down powerful, corrupt institutions. The package was sent at 4:17 a.m. The message subject read, "Cypress Springs, a community built on bones." They had thrown a stone into the pond. Now they had to wait for the ripples to reach the shore. Dawn broke, pale and washed out. The storm had passed, leaving the world looking newly scrubbed and deceptively pure. The tension in their house was a physical presence. A fifth member of the family that sat with them at breakfast followed them from room to room. Lily, sensitive to the atmosphere, was quiet and clingy. Every time a car slowed on their street, Mark's heart stopped. Every time the phone rang, Emily jumped. They were living on a fault line, waiting for the quake. It came at 11:03 a.m. A sleek black sedan pulled into their driveway. Not a police car, not Mr. Albright's car. A man and a woman in conservative but expensive business attire got out. They had the unmistakable aura of federal agents. Mark's blood ran cold. Had Henderson and Miller somehow preempted them? Had they called in a favor from some corrupt federal contact? The woman, who introduced herself as Special Agent Willis, held up a badge. "VI, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we need to speak with you. It's about the Cypress Springs Homeowners Association." For one terrifying moment, Mark considered slamming the door. But Emily, her lawyer's instincts kicking in, gently pulled him back. "About what, specifically?" she asked, her voice impressively steady. The male agent, Agent Croft, spoke, his eyes scanning their faces, the room, everything. "We received a tip. Credible information about illegal chemical dumping and possible involvement in missing persons cases. We understand you've lived here for a short time. We're speaking to all newer residents." They were lying. Mark could feel it. The tip had come from them, and the FBI was here because of their email. But they were playing a game, not revealing their hand. The agents asked careful, probing questions. Had they noticed anything unusual? Had their daughter experienced any health issues? Did they know Mr. Henderson or Officer Miller well? Mark and Emily played their part, the terrified, cooperative, new residents, feeding them just enough of the truth without revealing they were the source. They showed them Lily's faded rash. They mentioned the spicy water. They did not mention the cameras. They did not mention the video of the murder. The agents left 20 minutes later, their faces unreadable. The moment the door closed, Mark leaned against it, his legs weak with relief and terror. They're investigating. It's working. But Emily's face was still etched with worry. Or this is their way of containing us. of figuring out how much we know before they decide what to do with us. The day stretched on, an excruciating marathon of fear. Then at 7:32 p.m., as they were forcing themselves to eat dinner, Mark's encrypted email alert chimed. It was a response from Elena Vargas, the journalist. The message was brief and to the point. Received your package. The evidence is compelling. I have sources that corroborate parts of this. I am proceeding with the story. For your safety, do not contact me again. The storm is coming. They had unleashed the tempest. The machinery of justice, slow and cumbersome, was now in motion. But so was the machinery of a cornered, ruthless enemy. That night, as Mark took his now permanent post at the upstairs window, he saw something that turned his relief to ice. The white truck was not at the pool. Instead, Officer Miller's personal, unmarked police cruiser was parked just down the street, its engine off, its interior dark. He wasn't there to work. He was there to watch, to wait. The message was clear. The FBI's visit had not scared them off. It had only made them more dangerous. The hunters were now the hunted, and the prey knew their every move was being tracked. The final confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. And so the storm breaks. The truth is out there now, a seed planted in fertile ground. But the harvest will be bloody. The Thompson family has done all they can. They've armed the righteous and drawn the ire of the wicked. Now, they must survive the aftermath. They must live through the long, dark hours until sunrise, knowing that the men who control their world know they are the source of its coming destruction. This is where we leave them, for now, in the eye of the storm, waiting. The story of Cypress Springs is far from over, but some battles must be fought alone. Remember their story the next time you dip your toes in a community pool. Remember that beneath the placid surface, monsters can linger. Subscribe if you dare to hear what happens when the dust settles. But for now, sleep well if you can.